Okay, so welcome to the 2022 Education Development Career Panel. This is the first of two career panels that we're hosting here in the Comparative Education and International Development Community at Moray House at the University of Edinburgh. So my name is William Smith. I am the CEID Community Coordinator here, and I'm really excited to run this event again after quite a successful time last year. So supporting me in this event is our student CEID event planning team. I'll be thanking them at the end, but really appreciate their efforts in helping put this event together. As you'll see in a bit, we have 6 excellent panelists joining us today, so a big thank you to our panelists before we get started. The aim of our career panels are really to expose students and others interested to the wide variety of work in education and development being done by those currently positioned in international or regional organizations. And if I think back to my own time when I was pursuing my master's in international development, this is an important opportunity for students and those interested to really hear about the variety of different career options and career paths that are available to them. So the panelists have been asked to share a brief snapshot of their career journey, as well as some of the advice and challenges they've had over there. And I encourage everybody in the audience to think through and take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions related to occupation, career path to these experts that are working in the field. They come from a wide range of backgrounds and different experiences. So we should have quite a nice discussion. We have a very basic structure to today. So I've asked each panelist to spend about 7 minutes to share. They'll share a little bit on what they're currently doing in the current institution they work in, as well as on their career journey, the highlights edition. So we have some that would be considered early career professionals and some that are much more seasoned and senior professionals. So we're just getting the highlights version of their career journey, but feel free to ask questions in the open question and answer for more information on any of this. So I would encourage you as we go through again to feel free to add questions to the chat box as they come to you, or be ready at the end to raise your hand and ask questions to either a particular person on the panel or to the entire panel. Joining us today, I'm going to go through all of them and then I'll ask Viviana to start us off here. We have 6 wonderful people working broadly in the field of international development, some focusing more on education, some focusing on some other sectors in development. But I think you'll see that in development, you often work on multiple sectors. So we're going to start off with Viviana Cannon-Tamayo, who's the Data Innovation Project Manager at UNICEF. And then I'll invite Myra to come up, who's a research analyst for the Office of the Global Director for Education at the World Bank. I'll have Sebastian Hein follow, the program specialist at the International Institute of Educational Planning, the IIP UNESCO. Then we'll have Alison Girdwood follow, who's currently an independent evaluation consultant, but comes to us with a wide background, great experience, including with the British Council and DFID, which is now the FCDO in the UK. They'll be followed by Hyowon Park, who's an associate research fellow at the Korean Educational Development Institute. So thank you for joining all the way from Korea. And we'll finalize the panel today with Ganai Feridova, who's a project coordinator at UNESCO. So to get us started, we're going to do a slightly different structure here because Viviana does need to leave. So I'm going to ask her to go ahead and present for her 7 minutes. And then if you have specific questions for Viviana, take advantage because she'll be leaving us shortly. You won't have the opportunity at the end. So Viviana, welcome. It's always good to see you. So go ahead, feel free to unmute yourself and I will be quiet. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Will, and I am very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the panelists to be part of this discussion today. Well, my name is Viviana Cañón-Tamayo. I work for UNICEF as a Data Innovation Project Manager. So it is the Data and Analytics Division in UNICEF headquarters, New York. And basically, what we do in that section is to trying to understand how can we use big data and new data techniques to address the most important challenges for children and for society. So this is my current position. And then something about my career journey is, well, I have a very strong personal motivation to start studying and working on the development world. I am from Colombia, so it's a country in South America, which is very complex in terms of socioeconomic development. So since I was little, I got interested in understanding how can I help the world to be a better place, right? So I also have like some family situation that make me understand that the world is a place which is great, but we need to do something if we want to fight against poverty, inequalities, conflict, and some other issues. So I had this personal motivation, and then I choose to study government and international relations. And then I started working in the public sector in the Colombian government, in the Ministry of Justice, and then in the International Cooperation Agency in Colombia. And then when I did some work related to international cooperation and mostly South-South cooperation with many other countries, I realized I wanted to do a master's degree to learn more and to explore other areas of education. So I went to Paris, Sciences Po Paris, and I did my master's degree in international development, and I did like a important focus on how technology can help development. So after finishing my master, I started working on big data for social good. So how can we use big data from companies to do something that is not selling products, but is, helping society. So I started with a project, and then later I started working for UNICEF. It was 4 to 5 years ago. And I was the first country office doing serious work related to data innovation. So we did many things on school mapping, natural disasters, and epidemics. And after that, I started working for the division where I am since 2 years ago in data analytics, trying to understand how can we scale up a little bit what I was doing in the country office to other places where data can be a key asset to make decisions, basically. Before that, I also I make a startup on education. So a coding school, which was based in a French model called, I don't know if you know, School 42 or École 42. And I tried to create this school just to provide education in a specific area, which is coding, and is so much needed today in different countries. So I did that. I did have this experience, and I really like it, but it's very different. And somehow I returned to the public sector, and I am now in that position to see how can we navigate these options to address the biggest challenges we have in the socioeconomic space today. I think this is 7 minutes, right, Will?
Sorry, that's a very good start, Viviana. Thank you. So, and having known you for a little over a year now, I get to still hear a lot about and learn a lot about your background. Good stuff. So Viviana, we do have a question to get started. Looks like DePauli in the chat says, "Hi Viviana, thanks for taking time to talk with us. My question for you is, did you have the data analytics skills before you joined graduate school, or was it something you developed during or after graduate school, or did independent study for? How did you prepare yourself for that?"
It was after. So I am not a data scientist, but I work a lot with data scientists. So I was developing these skills while I was working with people as data scientists, software developers, and so on. So I guess it is always good if you have some uh, opportunities to study more about data analytics before. But if my role is not to develop models or any data science analysis, is more about how can I can ensure any data innovation project has all the key elements we need to make it possible. So we have the talent, the funding, the infrastructure, and the data in every single project we do. Yeah, I hope is clear.
Excellent. Another question. We've got time for maybe a couple more questions for Viviana as well. From McCain Nakamura. Yeah, Nakamura. So hi, Viviana, I have a question. What are the skills and key experiences you think are important to work as a project manager while you're not a data scientist?
Yeah, all interesting questions here. Well, I think is you need to be able to work with others, be playing a role which is, how can we help others to work in a I think in data science sometimes people tends to work independently, so it is very hard when you gather together a team and you have a common objective, and sometimes it's difficult for people to understand how to work with others. So I think it's good to have this role or this ability to put everyone in a room and then help them to walk through a common goal. So I will say that one, and also trying to understand what are the skills you have in the team. How can we focus on specific objectives? Because sometimes when you do a research project, it's very easy to spend lots of time in a small little part of the project. So we need to be focused, and we need to understand someone who is always saying, that's okay. We need to continue. We need to go to the next steps. We cannot do this part. The project, the aim of the project is not to develop this specific part. So let's work to it in a different dynamic. So I was also thinking about being flexible now that we are in the pandemic situation still. I think it's good to be able to work virtually when you need it, because sometimes you have teams all over the world and you need to be sure everyone is engaged, and then the fact of not being as before in the same room physically is always a challenge. So also helping the team to understand that's okay, there is a flexibility to work in these specific conditions, I will say.
Thanks, Viviana. Jingmei, did I see your hand up for a second? Do you want to?
Yeah, I have a questions for Viviana, because we are in the big data era. I think how to deal with data is very important for us. So do you have some suggestions for us to improve our ability to deal with data or something just like this? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think this is what is happening. UNICEF, but all UN agencies are, I think they are also doing similar things, which is we have our division, which is pretty big, 150 people, I will say. So this division is in charge of data, everything related to data. So I work a lot with statisticians. But then on big data, this is always, as UN organizations sometimes understand this as a new field. Teams are smaller, and knowledge is not in the organization itself. It is more in the innovation side or the exploration side. So, so I think it depends on what is your interest in terms of data analytics. You can, if you want to strengthen your ability in statistics, you know, there are many opportunities in an organization as UNICEF. And then if you want to go further and focus on data innovation, of course, it depends. I mean, most of the people who I work with are data scientists. So if you are a data scientist, you will have opportunities there for sure. And then, as you may know, data scientists are very difficult to find and then very expensive. They are gold for organizations as UNICEF, but for companies too. So I will say if you are not sure about doing a master degree and you like data, I will encourage you to try to study data science or computational science as an option, because there are lots of opportunities there for that.
Okay, thank you, Vivi. Hi, well, I think there is a question from the chat box for the Viviana, so shall we talk about it?
Yeah, so I think let's go to the one from Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, because I think Sebastian was fine with the original one. So Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim says, well, Viviana, this will be the last question for Viviana, because I know she needs to take off. This is more conceptually. So P.S., you know, can you give a brief on data mining and big data, and basically how or why are such concepts important in the 21st century? So give us your spiel. Why is this important? Why should we care about what you care about?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can provide one example on that. So yeah, UNICEF is using traditional data sources for ages to make decisions. So we applied surveys in many different countries to understand what is children's situation, what is, I don't know, socioeconomic indicators, things like that. But then at the same time, you see in the private sector, companies are using big data long time ago. So why? Because this data is produced every day, and then because it is more real time. So this real time factor is very relevant when you are working in humanitarian context. So let's say we have done things like let's think about what we are facing today with Ukraine. When international organizations would like to help, one thinking is, you know, let's go to the capital, and I will bring all our humanitarian support and services there, and people will be there waiting for us. And what is happening is that people are moving. So when the support came, no one is there. So if we have big data and we can understand how people are moving, then we are, you know, our support is going to be stronger and very efficient on that. So it is very important. We in the international development world, we start using this data and these data techniques as artificial intelligence and some others. Another data sources we use, of course, satellite imagery to understand changes in terms of climate change, for example, how things are changing from 10 years from now to today, and how can we predict what is going to happen in a couple of years. So I think that the potential is very important. And then of course, I don't know if this is related to your question, Mohammed, but we are facing also a problem is that these technologies were created in contexts of data-rich countries, right? So if you do analysis of a school mapping in the US, you know, you will find everything looks in a way that is not always the case in context as the context where UNICEF works. So we have done this, and we need fix these fundamental problems related to data bias and data fairness in terms of we need to be sure these technologies are thinking in the most vulnerable contexts and people. So I think that's also important. So it is important because of the practical side of the things. We need to, there is a potential to help decision makers to understand the current situation and make the decisions. And second, it is important to work in this space because there are many fundamental problems related to the use of big data in the development work that needs to fix it. So that's why an organization as UNICEF is doing this.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Viviana. I know you've got to run, but I really appreciate your time here. It's good to see you again. And thanks for sharing your insights and with our panel today.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Next up, I'd like to invite Myra up. So, Myra, feel free to throw your video on and.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
Nice to see you, and nice to meet everybody as well. I just want to check, can you hear the construction on the street, or is that's not coming through?
It's not too bad. I mean, I can hear a little buzz, but you're clear.
Yeah, it's the buzz. We've just had this entire week. He's just been banging. It's not banging today. It's just a buzz. But as long as you can hear me, that's fine. So really happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate, and really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists as well. So as Will kind of already went through a little bit, I'm currently a research analyst in the education global practice at the World Bank. I'm very happy to answer any questions that I don't cover in this introduction as well. I know the World Bank is kind of a confusing entity to explain, especially when thinking about some of our education work, but I'll do my best to cover what we do and how we work, and then I'm very happy to answer any sort of career-related questions that people have as well. So I'll start with a little bit of just my background, and honestly, if the noise gets too loud, just tell me and I'll try and move somewhere else. So I've been at the World Bank for almost 7 years now. For the first 5 years, I was working as a consultant in their operations teams all over the world. So that means I was traveling to several different regions, several different countries to do all sorts of different projects in education, ranging from early childhood education all the way up to tertiary education and adult education and skills. After those 5 years, almost 5.5 years, I joined my current position, which is in the office of the global director. So that's just Jaime Saavedra, who a few of you might already have heard of and know. And so now I work in something called the front office team. So instead of being in operations and working directly with our countries, our ministries, our projects, I work a bit more on the overall total portfolio that we do. So I've been pretty lucky to have experience in both of those. Before I started at the World Bank, I received my master's degree in international education policy. And right before that, I worked at Teach for Pakistan in Pakistan, which is where I'm from. That was sort of my first experience in education, working at Teach for Pakistan. I had worked in nonprofits before. I knew I wanted to work in international development. I just wasn't sure about what speciality I wanted to be in. And then I started working at Teach for Pakistan, was very motivated by all the work they were doing. I'm also happy to talk about that in case anyone's interested. Applied for master's programs, specifically in international education policy, because before I just had worked on a lot of sort of national education programs, and you work with regions, you work on a country basis, and so I was very interested in working in either the UN or the World Bank or an international education system. And once I completed my degree, I think I got really lucky that I got this job. I know I know it's really tough to enter some of these systems, so I definitely want to underscore there's a certain amount of luck involved in all of these processes. So what I did for the first sort of 5 years at the World Bank, and I'll give some examples, and I'm happy to go in depth in a lot of them. So the way that the World Bank education team is structured, and the way that sort of all our teams are structured, is that we have regional groups that we work in, and then we usually have like one front office group, which is what I'm in now. And so we have the LAC group, we have the MENA group, we have the South Asia, Southeast Asia, and we have 3 subgroups within Africa as well. So If you're at the World Bank, you're most likely going to be placed in a regional group. Either you're based in DC or you can be based in the country offices, which is a lot more likely. And the World Bank strategy, I think, is now also to shift most of our stuff out of the headquarters into regional offices and into country offices. In sort of within that, at any given time, you'll probably be working on 2 projects. It depends on the country size. If it's a really large country, it could be 2 or 3. If it's a smaller country, then it's probably just 1 project ongoing at a time. The World Bank project cycle is about 4 to 5 years, so it takes a while to kind of set the entire project up. There's an entire project preparation phase, then there's the project implementation phase, and then there's the closing phase, and that whole process takes a little longer than 4 to 5 years, but I was really fortunate to kind of work through all of these different phases that we have. In terms of the sort of sizes of projects that we work on, they range anything from, if it's a small country in the Caribbean, it could be about 10 million or 15 million, to I think one of our larger projects right now is 800 million to the DRC. And I'm just specifically talking about education. Of course, we have other projects in health and agriculture and transport, energy, but that's specifically what we're doing on education. And so it's very interesting. It's very exciting to kind of work with the ministries and with the governments to figure out what the project components are. I always also like to say our main clients are the country governments. It's quite rare that we work with private NGOs or any sort of private corporations. We have a separate wing called the IFC that does that sort of work. But yeah, we work mainly with governments, mainly with the ministries of education, sometimes the ministries of labor and jobs, especially if it's sort of a schools to jobs pipeline project. And so that's been very exciting, very interesting, and it's also quite good to have projects at scale. So if you have a primary education project, it's very likely that the project is going to be impacting every primary school in that country. And we can talk about the usefulness of doing things like that. But that's kind of an overview of World Bank projects. I think I just have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to talk a bit more about what I do now. And so that was sort of what we do in sort of every single country that we're in. Alongside, of course, the project implementation, the World Bank is also a huge source for data. Data not just on education, but data on poverty and a bunch of other indicators as well. And it's very sort of cross-sectional and collaborative when it comes to that. And so for a lot of the projects I worked on, there was also specific research agendas that we're trying to meet. And we try to make it as harmonious as possible, where we're collecting data at the same time where there's a project, so that the data can help inform the project design as well. I've also worked on sort of large scale education and skills projects that are not necessarily tied to one of these big development projects we have, but just contribute to our research. So for example, we have the STEP skills measurement project that I worked a lot on, which is trying to get an equivalent of PIAC in sort of the non-OECD countries. And we did a lot of research and survey design for that, so I'm happy to talk about that too. What I do now is sort of monitoring our overall portfolio. And so at any given time, we have between 170 and 180 projects active across about 90-ish countries. Our entire portfolio size is about 24 billion. So a lot of my job now is just tracking to make sure that just tracking trends and seeing how many projects are opening or closing, what the sizes of our projects are, and then doing a lot of work as well on girls' education. It's about 50% of my portfolio. We're still building this out a bit more comprehensively, but it's research, it's analysis, and it's also a bit more to do with strategy in the new office that I'm working in. Apart from that, a lot of my work now focuses on partnerships. So with Unesco, with UNICEF, with FCDO, with the Gates Foundation, all these small things. So it's a bit more on an advocacy level and a partnership level as well. So yeah, I've been super lucky to have experience in both sort of the meat, the operational side, and sort of being there in the country, and then also now at this slightly higher level. I think that's everything you wanted me to cover, Will, in this first 7 minutes.
Great,
I
Myra, thank you.
Answer any questions.
Thanks so much. I do see some questions popping up, but we're going to hold those because I think there's going to be some similar questions coming up for all of our panelists. Really appreciate the overview of the World Bank, which is kind of interesting to see its structure, as well as recognizing that some of this is luck. Some of this is luck. So, all right, so we're going to hear from the rest of ours. Do continue to add questions, Dan, and we'll come back to all that in our open discussion. So next up, I'd like to invite Sebastian. Come on up and join us. Welcome, Sebastian.
Thanks, Will. Nice to see you all. So yes, my name's Sebastian. I'm currently a program specialist at Unesco's International Institute for Educational Planning. I've been there about a year. I'll tell you a bit about how I ended up here, and I guess some things I've learned along the way, I suppose. So yeah, after being a teacher for a couple of years, I did a master's in London at UCL Institute of Education in this field. So I knew I wanted to enter this sector. So the master's was, I can't remember the name of it. Education, International Development, Economics, some combination of those. Yeah, okay, it's been a while since I've thought about it. Interesting. But yeah, it was a full-time master's, but honestly, I wasn't a great student. I didn't really want to go back to university, but I did want to work in this sector, and that was my way to do it. So I started looking for work during my master's, and as soon as I started finding work, I switched to part-time study to focus on work, and then I just finished off the master's as and when I could. So actually, the first few roles I got were very small projects, 5 days here, 10 days here, supporting mostly independent consultants or some of my lecturers. So those were more research roles, and actually, lecturers, they spend a lot of their time actually doing research, and they might have research assistant roles or positions. So if there's projects you think look interesting, yeah, do ask them. They might be able to help you out. I then did an unpaid internship at the Overseas Development Institute, which is a research institute or a think tank, also in London. And I guess we'll talk about internships later, but that was the best opportunity I could find, and I ended up working there for 3 years in a research role. So I didn't actually know I would end up in research within this sector, but it is one of the areas you can end up in. It did suit me. Had I known or had I wanted to go into research, I would have taken better advantage of my master's by doing one of the research methods modules, or a couple of research methods modules. I think that's one of the skills you can pick up through your university courses. And yeah, we'll talk about skills. I think they're pretty important, and that's definitely one you can do at university. I then spent 2 years at Save the Children, also in a research role. But within the education policy and advocacy team, and interestingly, I applied for a role there that I wasn't qualified for. So I applied for a policy and advocacy role themed on education and emergencies. So I didn't really have policy advocacy experience, and there are definite skills to do that work. But thematically, I had done a lot on education in emergencies. So yeah, they were kind enough to offer me an interview. I think we quickly figured out that the role wasn't for me, but there was a match to be had. So they offered me a 6-month role in the team as a researcher within the team. And then I ended up staying there for 2 years in that role. So there's as mentioned before, there is luck to it, but there's an element of sort of creating luck and creating opportunities where things could happen. Similarly, a year later, after 2 years at Save the Children, I moved to the Global Education Monitoring Report, which is where I know Will from. We shared an office, which was great. And same thing there. I applied for a role I wasn't really qualified for, but I was interested in the organization and their projects. So I applied for, I think, an education finance research role. I'd done a little bit on finance, but I knew they would take an economist, a finance statistician, like a proper specialist. But during the hiring process for that role, the person who was writing the forced displacement section of the 2019 Global Education Monitoring Report, which was on migration, they changed roles, so the team quickly needed to bring in someone to do that. They knew I was interested, and I'd recently done a lot of work on refugee education, so they offered me a consultancy for a year. So again, that was more creating luck. I then, after completing that project, was a consultant for a couple of years, which is a different avenue you can go down. I didn't think I was ready for it, but apparently I was, and there was demand for my skills as researcher, writer, a bit of tool development as well. And then, yeah, last year I started working at IAEP, and yeah, the projects I work on now are a bit of a mix. So there's some research. There's one project which is looking at Ministry of Education leadership in the early stages of crises. So looking at the first three months of response, and a more technical project supporting ministries of education to better use education emergencies data in their education management information systems. So that's more technical support to countries. So I guess, yeah, three things that I've found have been useful for me when thinking about how to sort of develop a career, or three domains. One is your sort of knowledge base or thematic expertise. So for me, that's been more education in emergencies, and at one point particularly on refugee and forced displacement. But I've deliberately tried to stay quite broad. So I've also done things on early childhood education, on financing, quite a bit on gender, and that's been my preference. So, you know, I prefer to stay quite broad and know about a lot of things. But there are people definitely within the sector who become sort of an uber specialist in one very niche thing, and they're very in demand for that kind of thing. So think about your interests. You know, do you want to stay quite broad, or do you want to become really specialist in one thing? And they're both good options, but it's something to consider. Second is skills. So are there skills you want to develop, things you're particularly interested in? So we heard about data before. There's a big demand for that. You know, my skills are more towards research and policy, and now at IAP developing more education systems technical skills. So yeah, do you want to develop particular skills? And again, you know, you could stay quite broad and develop lots of different skills to a certain level, or you can become something like a monitoring and evaluation specialist, and they definitely exist. And then third is network. Network is, I found, has been super important, and for me, moving from different types of organizations and keeping my themes quite broad, you know, I've managed to develop quite a large network. So when I did become a consultant, when people found out I was available, you know, they immediately could put me in touch with work or offer me work straight away. So I think, yeah, those are things to consider. So yeah, knowledge, skills, and network. And yeah, have those conversations. Apply for anything you think could be relevant. Don't wait until you're fully qualified for something, because you don't know what exactly they're missing in their team. Something might come up. And I'll leave it there, hand over to Will, and happy to answer questions later on.
Thanks, Sebastian. So some interesting advice. I think a lot of people are hesitant to apply for things that they don't see themselves as a tight fit for. Some interesting advice for you, Sebastian. Thanks. I want to invite Alison now up to share. Alison, thanks for joining. It's over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you see and hear me all right? Yes, good. I think I'd like to echo particularly what Seb's been talking about. My last job, my final, I'm sort of retiring into consultancy at the moment, but my last main job was as Director of Evidence Evaluation and Learning at the British Council. But to do that job, I kind of drew on everything else that I had been doing up till then. So I'll leave that to the end. And really just, as I think has come out, it was quite late before I knew I wanted to work internationally. And I actually was kind of fairly well established in a career in higher education administration. And for those of you who are students at Edinburgh, I was working at the University of Edinburgh. And the way I got into my job as an administrator, because it's not actually a job you kind of grow up thinking you desperately want to do, but I had started out working, I was unemployed, and I got a job in the printing department as a typesetter, and we used to typeset all the court and senate minutes, and I became absolutely fascinated by higher education policy and how the university was responding to the general environment of cuts. This was way back in the 1980s. And so I moved into administration, and I got quite a solid technical understanding of the whole policy environment in higher education in the UK, and then some emerging issues about the emphasis on university teaching and quality assurance and the various structures and mechanisms that were put in place to deal with that. So that was my background. Around this time, I became really convinced I wanted to work internationally. And I took on a role well, I got involved with a small NGO that was working in scholarships and international development at that time. Ended up as chair, and that was really interesting, just getting out there. It was a north-south NGO, so there was a lot of sort of began to go to international meetings and to understand how you worked in development. And then I decided to do the Masters in African Studies, just to get a better understanding of I don't know, the historical and political and other context of the area that was of greatest interest to me, which was Africa. And so I did my Masters, and because I was already working at a certain level, I focused quite a lot. At that time, there wasn't a specific stream on education, but I was able to find modules that allowed me just to focus more or less entirely on education, and I got involved. And I know there's some background here, but I was also it was through NORAG. Kenneth King was my supervisor, and anybody who's worked with Ken knows you get dragged into doing odd pieces of work for him. So I started to write critiques and small pieces for him, which actually led on to then doing a small piece of research in the World Bank. And that led on to doing some consultancies. So I think as other people have been saying, any small thing that you take because you're interested in, it's always an opportunity, and it might lead to other things. I reached a point at Edinburgh where I sort of knew I wanted to work internationally, and it wasn't entirely compatible with the job I had at that point. So I got a job as a researcher at the University of Bath, where there was a fledgling centre looking at international higher education. And that allowed me to do the field work for my PhD, which was really, I didn't really think of it that way, but it was actually an evaluation. It was a study of policy change through a World Bank programme. And I got really interested in the political economy of change, and how the kind of formal structure of the bank actually couldn't touch the political processes that were going underneath. Which actually really were critical to the programme's effectiveness. So that was absolutely fascinating, and I had the wonderful opportunity of just sitting talking to Ghanaian academics. It was it was such a privilege, and it was one of the most interesting periods of my life. Anyway, I was working at ICHEM, and then wanted to move into a more formal structure, because I was fairly clear I didn't want to be a researcher. I wanted to be involved in implementation. So I then got a job at the Commonwealth Secretariat, where I was the higher education manager, and that was interesting. I think it allowed me to understand how international organisations function, and to work with an absolutely fascinating group of people from around the Commonwealth. But also we did ministerial meetings where I got to understand, really, sort of interact with ministers and sort of move to a different level in terms of how you think about the structures of education in different countries and things. I had originally wanted to work for the World Bank, but it was over this time I was actually commuting into work, and such is the way I think that opportunities happen. I travelled on the train with a number of civil servants, some of them at a senior level and some of them at other levels in different departments, and became absolutely fascinated by the UK civil service and how it worked. And so I then managed to get a job in the Department for International Development and spent 14 fascinating years there. It was, I mean, I think I was really privileged to be there in the late it was 2001 when I moved, but it was still at that time when development was a high priority for this government. It was fascinating. There were so many interesting people. You had so much opportunity to interact with, and I was going to come to, one of the things I think it's really important to understand is to kind of understand the international architecture and where you fit into that. And so I was part of the, sort of the international aid architecture. It was a bit of a shock that my first job in was working for the Overseas Territories Department. So I was recruited as an education advisor, but that was the job was absolutely fascinating, but a bit limited in scope, given that I wanted to work in development, and the overseas territories are slightly different. They are fascinating, but it's different. But I did 4 years there, but moved into program management as much as education. And I think, program management skills came up, and I mean, it's absolutely central to really understand how to make things happen, because it's very easy for people to make them not happen if you don't have the skills to do that. So I think that was a useful time. But anyway, around this time, I finished my PhD, wanted to do something more analytical, so I moved into the evaluation department. At that time in DFID, evaluation was it was a sort of backwater for people who had PhDs. And they wrote interesting reports that sat on shelves. But there was a report published in 2005, which for me was one of the kind of guiding lights. It was called When Will We Ever Learn? And it was a big thing in the United States. And it was really saying we spend billions of pounds of money on international development, but we don't have the evidence to know what we're actually achieving with it. And there was a real push into evaluation. A lot of it in the States particularly was on sort of formal impact evaluation and RCTs, less so in the UK. But it was a fascinating time just to be there because it was so high profile. And also we did a lot of joint evaluations. I better stop soon. But anyway, that was also the opportunity to meet a lot of people on the analytical side with many of the, we did joint evaluations through the OECD. There was a kind of mechanism with the Development Assistance Committee where we came up with themes. So we did one on, one of the big aid instruments at the time. So that was budgetary support. So there was a joint evaluation of budgetary support, which was 24 countries and donors working together on this evaluation. DFID put the money in, so we led on it. The other one, which is slightly relevant here, was an evaluation of what at that time was the Fast Track Initiative, and is now the Global Partnership for Education. So that was really interesting, working jointly with USAID and some of the Scandinavian donors and Unesco on that evaluation. Had the great privilege of working with Joe DeStefano from RTI, who acted as the secretariat for the evaluation, and so that was really interesting. So anyway, I had that really interesting period in the department, in the evaluation department. I then did a short period overseas working in Rwanda, just as an education program manager, managing that was done as bilateral aid. It was sector budget support rather than general. So I did that, and then I went into the research department, and I had the opportunity of setting up the new research program for DFID. So I tried to spend a bit of time trying to work out what were the really key questions where we needed better evidence to underpin our programming work in education. So that was a really enjoyable period. I had to close down some research consortia, but we were trying to work out how we would do it. Came out with a lot of what we called rigorous reviews, trying to pull together the evidence and work out where the gaps were, so where we could go after that. I finished with my time at DFID with a spell in the Conflict, Humanitarian and Security Department, looking at humanitarian evaluation. Just finished, then I went to the British Council. I was actually headhunted. That was great fun, going to an interview, and they said, "Why did you choose to apply for this job?" It's very nice being said. I didn't. But anyway, so in the British Council, I was recruited as an advisor in a technical post, but fairly quickly, because there weren't the structures, moved in to gradually, or fairly quickly, we set up an evaluation function to come up with a much new results framework for the organisation and start to look at how we might gather evidence of the British Council's work. I don't know if anybody's particularly interested in the British Council and how it is, but it's one of those organisations. It takes about 2 years working in it before you can actually say what it really does. But it's it's cultural relations, so it's building relationships. Doing some project work, but a lot of it is about networks and relationships in countries. And so evidencing it is quite difficult. You've got the programme evaluations, but we were trying to also understand the British Council as a convening organisation and what it achieved at country level. So that actually was one of the most challenging evaluations, because it's quite difficult to get a handle on that. So it was an interesting way to finish up. I think I've probably used up my time. I'll just say that the things that I would emphasise, along with the others, that, sort of administrative skills are really essential. Networks are really important. I think almost everything is a networking opportunity, and it's both a good way of developing your career, but also really fulfilling and enjoyable, building up networks, talking to people, and so on. Also, a job is never just a job that you do. It's always an opportunity to develop and change whatever role you've got. And the more you can do that, I think the more successful you are. Always try and do something with a job. Don't just do the job. That's fairly standard stuff. But I also found it's also have something you're really interested in. I was always interested in educational policy and the political economy of change. That's kind of driven me. I've been fascinated by it. And then as I moved into evaluation, it was also, sort of how do we evidence this? What's the theory underpinning the program? How do we show what it's doing or not doing by whichever of the tools that are available that you can. So I think that's basically it. I think so. Yeah, very happy to answer questions later. Yeah.
Thanks, Alison. A whole wealth of experience there. Really appreciate you joining us today. I'm actually going to move to Gane Feridova next, if that's okay with you, Hyowon. I just want to make sure we get her here because she does need to leave a little early. So,
okay.
So Gane, you're up. You got 7 minutes. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Will. Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here. So I'll try to be short and concise in order to stay within the limits of 7 minutes. In my introduction, I will try to present first the highlights of my career path, and then I will share with you my personal observation and recommendations in terms of what is required to be part of the international organizations. So I started with the international organizations already with 6 years of professional experience behind me, and with 2 master's degrees with distinctions in MBA and in political sciences from Sorbonne University in Paris. So before joining the world of international organizations, I worked for the public sector in Azerbaijan, in Baku, from where I'm from, and where I first started as an intern, of course, and then I was offered a fixed-term position, and I was in charge of the department dealing with the international relations. So this work experience actually familiarized me with real life challenges at the national level, and also made me realize what would be my further professional objectives and what I truly want to do in life, and so on. So I always have this passion to do something like very human-oriented, something that even in small portions may be indirectly contributing to global challenges, to do the work that actually benefits others. So at that moment, I took a decisive step to deviate from my career path in the public sector and switch to international organizations. But before doing that, I went back to studies. I entered Sorbonne University in France to study political sciences with specific focus on international relations and sustainable development. Then I worked in OECD, Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation, and UNESCO as well, to support various humanitarian and development projects in different regions, more specifically in Eastern Europe, in South Caucasus, and Central Asia, in the fields of economics, education, and social and human sciences. So currently, I'm working in inclusion, rights, and dialogue section of social and human sciences in UNESCO. In the section, we are working on a wide variety of thematic areas. I am in charge of the project focused on intercultural dialogue. So we are trying to analyze how actually intercultural dialogue can contribute to global challenges. And maybe to give you a quick explanation, intercultural dialogue, it's defined as a transformative communication, as a process of transformative communication and exchange. And maybe to make it simpler, at the basic level, it refers to the space of exchange opportunities of the wide range of participants coming from different cultural and academic backgrounds, but who are trying to find out a common ground. So it's known to be a value-driven process where the participants' commitment are linked to certain values such as empathy, willingness to accept the changes, diversities, mutual respect, and understanding. So throughout my professional experience, I realized that I have learned a lot to better understand the cultural differences and diversities and the way they actually shape individuals' approach to work and to life. In terms of my personal observations and recommendations on what is needed to work for international organization, I realized that the main requirement is to have a well-balanced combination of soft skills and hard skills. When we say soft skills, we mean the skills like critical thinking, problem solving, professional writing, public speaking, digital literacy, of course, team working. And when we say hard skills, they are more focused on specifics, on the requirements and expectations of the individual posts or professions, as we say. So the things like the skills like emotional intelligence, flexibility, working under pressure, especially with tight deadlines, are just the value-added skills. In general, what I realized that entering the international system can be highly competitive because there is a lot of demand. And international organizations, they typically require, of course, first relevant postgraduate degree and a few years of relevant professional experience. So depending on the specific job requirements, as a candidate, you may need specific technical skills and the knowledge of the field. Of course, beforehand experience in this specific thematic field is essential because it will help you to develop your analytical and drafting skills that are super important in this system. Because you working here is also one part of the reality is to producing a lot of research, a lot of analytical papers. So being able to produce them, to produce interesting reports, writing pieces is super important. And what I also realized that actually even at the very entry level of professional positions, you may require to have at least 2 or even 3 years of professional experience behind you. So knowing from the very beginning what kind of positions you want, as well as what technical and specific skills are required for this specific job, will make it easier to prepare yourself for this position. Of course, this goes without saying, like knowledge of English is a must in this world, but knowledge of at least one more UN languages, such as, Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, is also super helpful, especially working on a country level projects or on regional projects. And maybe to give you a clear idea, normally in the whole UN system, there are 2 types of positions. So there are so-called G positions that are known to be general services positions, where the functions are mostly linked to administrative secretarial work. And then there is P positions, so-called professional positions, where you have internationally recruited experts. And here the competition is very strong and the requirements are very high. So being part of these organizations, it's not once you enter this world, it means also upholding their values, their multicultural, results-oriented characteristics. So, of course, in this world, the knowledge of international relations, international dynamics, their trends and consequences are key to be able to navigate in the whole system and to ensure at the same time that there is respect and there's respect, and on top of that there's consideration of any organizations or agencies' goals, values, strategies. So the whole system is and the working in the system can be demanding and challenging, but at the same time it's very stimulating because you're exposed to work to different stakeholders, and actually everyday work gives you kind of impetus, a profound sense of meaning. This is all from my side, and I'm glad to take your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thanks, Inay. So I know you can hang around for about another 10 minutes.
Exactly.
I'll encourage anybody to actually add questions for Inay into the chat box. If you can address them there, I wanted to make sure we get to Hyowon and then the broader conversation. So Hyowon, I'm going to stop presenting and ask you to go ahead and share your screen.
Great.
So you got 7 minutes, so
okay,
be amazing.
Yes. Thank you, Will, for having me on this panel. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Hyowon Park, and I am currently an Associate Research Fellow at Korean Educational Development Institute, KEDI. KEDI might be unfamiliar to most of you, so I would like to start my talk with a brief introduction to KEDI. KEDI was established in 1972 as the first government-funded R&D institute for education in Korea. So this year is our 50th anniversary. So here you see the logo with the number 50. The Korean Educational Development Institute, KEDI, has played a leading role in the development of Korean education by carrying out a variety of research projects while supporting national educational agendas and providing policy suggestions. We aim to establish a stronger and closer collaborative network with domestic and international organizations through exchanging knowledge and research findings. We established close partnerships with 247 domestic institutions that include central and local governments, educational institutions, and public institutions. And KEDI maintains a relationship with international and regional organizations such as OECD and Unesco, and is actively engaged in international cooperative activities for educational development with 46 governments, higher education institutions, and educational organizations from 17 countries. This is the organization of KEDI with 6 divisions, and this Office of International Cooperation is where I currently work at. I've been participating in a number of research since I joined KEDI in 2019, such as research on sustainable development goals, developing capacity building programs for educational professionals in developing countries, and some other research related to teachers, which is my major interest. Currently, I am a work stream leader for the SESIP program, which is the Secondary Education Sector Improvement Program in Sri Lanka, financially and technically funded by Asian Development Bank, ADB. As it is a 3-year project, I have been working with the Sri Lankan Ministry of Education and provincial education authorities and conducting workshops and progress sharing meetings to build strategies on deploying SDMC teachers, such as science, technology, mathematics, and commerce teachers, and implement incentive policy to attract teachers to difficult and very difficult schools in Sri Lanka. Also, I am participating in the CPLM advisory group. CPLM is a Southeast Asia primary learning metrics, which was initiated by Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Association, CMEO, and UNICEF in 2012, I believe. I am to attend the policy roundtable to join the expert commentary on findings session under the theme of supporting teachers to improve learning next week. And KEDI is inviting technical experts from CMEO members for workshops for their second round, CPLM 2023, probably next year. Also engaging in, supporting and organizing various international meetings, seminars, and workshops such as the annual KEDI UNESCO seminar, in which the tentative theme for this year will be learning recovery. And we had a webinar with the Vietnam National Institute of Educational Sciences, Vietnamese, just a couple of days ago on education during COVID-19. Let me move on to my career journey. While I was majoring in education in an undergraduate program, I was trained to become a secondary school teacher and experienced 4 weeks of teaching practicum in high school. I was also trained to become an education policy researcher. My first comparative education experience was a research trip to Finland with friends and a professor while I was a junior at university. I visited elementary school, middle school, high school, and university, Helsinki University, I recall, to compare Finnish teacher education and Korean teacher education system. I wanted to contribute to the development of Korean teacher policy. This is because I believed that teachers are one of the biggest influencing factors, not only on students' academic achievement, but also their future lives. So I went to the United States to further my study in education policy, and at the time, I had a very hard time because I lost my direction of life for a while. It was my first time living alone and living in a small town of only 160,000 populations in a long winter that is from October to April with lots of snow, but no sun for more than 10 consecutive days. This was a huge shift for me after spending my entire life in a city, in a capital city in Korea, Seoul, which has almost 10 billion populations. Fortunately, I met good colleagues like Will and good professors, including my advisor, Jerry Latandra. I was able to graduate with 2 degrees, educational theory and policy, dual title in comparative and international education. I returned to Korea as soon as the final defense was over, not attending the graduation ceremony, and started my life as a researcher. And then I was lucky enough to move to CEID, my dream job. And since then, I have been working hard to contribute not only to Korean education, but also to education around the world. Besides my life at CEID, I lectured comparative education policy seminar at the Korea National University of Education, targeting teachers and administrators from developing countries last year for 2 semesters, and planning to contribute again next year for 2 semesters. The program that I took part in was a part of KOICA, a Korea International Cooperation Agency project that invites educators from developing countries for master's program. Also, I have been given workshops and lectures on learning strategies and how to live a good life as a graduate student. So I may not be a perfect example for this panel, but I hope that my experience can be an example for providing options for you to work at national or governmental institutes while contributing to other countries. I would like to end my talk with this hilarious but somewhat heartbreaking cartoon. I think many of you might have already seen this. Life as a graduate student can be very hard. You see, your original plan must have been like that at the top here, but your reality is full of obstacles. But just keep in mind that everyone else is the same, and eventually you can achieve it if you don't give up. So never give up and believe in yourself. You can do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Hyowon. Inspiring way to finish the panel presentations. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for sharing. There's lots of questions going up here. I'm going to somewhat consolidate those because we don't have a ton of time. And so there's some similar topics out there. And while I'm looking at that and consolidating, I'm going to invite Jiang Mei, who helped put this panel together at the University of Edinburgh with me, to ask the first question. Jiang Mei, it's over to you.
Hi everyone. I have a question for Myra because I am really interested in your working experience, because you said as you said, I think if we got a lot of the working experience, it is beneficial for us to get a job in your organization. So what's your recommendation for us, especially to get internship or some jobs which can help us to get the job in your organization?
Okay, so I'd like to expand that a little bit to just let's talk about internships. We've heard a little bit about the importance of professional experience here, and I think Tamara mentioned that there's this kind of catch-22 that you need experience to get a job, but you might actually have too much experience to do an internship. what is the advice on how do you get professional experience, advice on seeking out an internship? I know many of you kind of went through that path. Any advice? And I'm happy to go whoever wants to chat first. I think we've got 4 panelists left and we're all on screen. So feel free to just unmute yourself and we'll move on.
Okay.
Okay, I can start. Yeah, because I did an internship. It was 4 months, part-time, unpaid. I mean, they paid for lunch and travel, but that's negligible. The only reason I was able to do that though was because I was living with family at the time. So it's increasingly internships are being paid, and obviously I think they should be paid everywhere. Some organizations are still in the dark ages and not paying interns yet. There are also scholarships. So I did have an intern working with me this summer from Germany. So Germany has something called the Schmidt program that pays for people to do internships at certain organizations. So if you're from Germany, have a look at that. If you're from other countries, then see if your country has any kind of similar scholarship program. But yeah, if you're doing an internship, see if you can get it paid. It's always worth asking. If you're doing an unpaid internship, because it can be a good option, then know that that organization really does owe you quite a big deal. So either see if you can get it translated into paid work afterwards. So while I was at ODI doing mine, I tried to make sure I got involved in lots of projects and sort of said yes to everything, so that when it came to the end of my internship, there was like a gap in the team, right? So they decided to keep me on, and you find in our sector turnover is quite high in our organizations. So if you manage to stay with an organization for a bit of time, a role could open up. If it's a very small organization that has a very small budget and they're really not able to provide anything paid afterwards, then they should be able to sort of give you their network and offer you around to other places and give you recommendations and try and help find you work at other places. So it's definitely an opportunity. And yeah, entry-level roles in our sector is a pretty grey area. There are some big organizations that have entry schemes, but otherwise it's pretty grey. And in the organizations I've been on, I've seen a lot of people kind of come in by just getting in touch and saying, do you have any internship or sort of research assistant level things, because these aren't necessarily advertised, and something might come of it. So if there's an organization nearby that you like, then get in touch with them.
Anybody else want to jump in on internships, or how do you get professional experience when it, I think all of you said that kind of these entry-level jobs even require years of professional experience. So any suggestions on that?
Yeah, may I jump in?
Yep.
So there are different possibilities to get internships. So they are so-called internship roosters that you can actually apply online and send your CV via the system. And another option is actually reaching out to the supervisors of a specific, or to the staff of a specific project, because all the information is available online, and normally the contact details of each professional staff working on a specific project is also available. So do not hesitate. For example, prepare a short message highlighting your key skills and that is needed to do that job, and also submit your short but not like long motivation letter to do a specific task, and yeah, that will help you actually to get in contact with the people. And actually I do think that internship is a wonderful opportunity once you like a wonderful opportunity to enter into the system, because there are different entry points. So there's internships, there are fellowship programs, and there is a direct consultancy opportunities, but mostly for the people with some experience behind. And actually the entry point, if it's internship, then after a certain months of internship, there's a possibility to get a temporary contract, like Sebastian mentioned. It can be a consultancy contract or other type of contract that actually helps you to create your first network within a specific agency or organization, which is super important at the first as the first steps to navigate in this system. I hope it answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent, good stuff. I want to jump now to a slightly different entry. So you've got experience in internship. We had questions from multiple people in the chat about consultancy. And a lot of you talked about consultancy and starting off with kind of consultant or contract pieces. When I was looking at consultancy, there was also some concern that you might get stuck in consultancy. So I'm wondering a couple things about consultancy. First, kind of your entry into that, and do you, what is it? Oh, and there was, I think, the advice on consultancy that Sebastian had addressed some on the proposal, but thinking about consultancy as an entry point into a permanent position or the benefits of doing consulting contracts, are there any concerns you have in going the consultancy route? So, Alison, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, Seb, but I first met Seb when he was a consultant. But no, I think it's particularly at the moment, it's a very good opportunity. Certainly speaking from the FCDO DFID side, that a lot of, I mean, DFID and FCDO do not do programs, they commission them out. And therefore you get to know all the people working in the consultancy firms. I think as an associate or a junior consultant, I think it's very hard work. You know, you have to be prepared to travel a lot, work very long hours and so on. But I've seen a number of people who then moved into advisor positions in DFID stroke FCDO because of their very strong consultancy background. And they did, you know, given the, I think it's are you an independent consultant? Well, I think it's probably difficult to be an independent. You would probably need to go into one of the firms, I think, unless you've got very specific, strong experience. You'd get a lot more general experience in one of the bigger companies, but others may have a different view on that. But that certainly is what I saw, you know, sort of in terms of you then get to know the teams. And I think there's quite a lot of mentoring between the junior consultants and the senior consultants. So there is a parallel structure there that is quite professionally established.
Thanks, Alison. Myra, I know you talked about working for 5 years before you kind of landed your current position. What was that experience like, and would you encourage others to kind of go through the consultancy route?
Yeah, so I'm obviously at a different level of my consultancy career, or I was, and I'm not doing that anymore as Alison. So there's a wide variety of consultancies, and just as Alison said, the reason they exist is because a lot of these organizations that work in this space don't do the project themselves. They kind of are the managers of the projects, and they put out requests for proposals from technical experts, because it gets very expensive to, you know, have a learning assessment expert on the team full time when, you know, they're just needed through the project cycles. And as I also kind of said, the World Bank project cycle is 4 or 5 years. Our projects have very different interests. So if in Kenya we have a project focused on teacher professional development for 5 years, we're going to look for teacher professional development consultancy experts for those 5 years. And then the next project will be, you know, not on teacher professional development. So that's kind of explaining why this process exists. I would say it is a lot tougher. I personally enjoyed it a lot, but you're not full-time employed. You often don't have health insurance or any other benefits that you get. But I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. So I did have a supreme amount of flexibility that I do not have now, that I could be based anywhere as long as kind of the work was being done. I was also kind of the one going to country and actually like doing the work, as opposed to the people who are managing me that were sitting in headquarters and just checking in now and then. So you're kind of, as a consultant, you're the one doing the meat of the work. You're working with the ministry, you're designing the projects, you're consulting with local stakeholders. So it's kind of like definitely a pro and con. I would say if you're interested in being sort of a subject matter expert in one of these education fields, whether it's, you know, teacher professional development or early childhood education or assessment design, whatever it is, I would say then it's probably a little bit easier to go the consultancy route, because you could also, you know, do a project with the World Bank for 6 months and then, you know, work on a UNICEF proposal and work with UNICEF in a different country for a certain amount of time. But it is obviously a lot less uncertain, and it's a lot less stable, and there's no guaranteed flows of income. So you just, it's kind of a big risk to take. I would say I had been in the World Bank system for so long. I mean, I also like knew everybody. I'd worked on, I think, 20 different countries by then. So it wasn't that hard of a transition for me to move from that kind of role. I wasn't, you know, in the UNICEF system, I wasn't trying to work in a bunch of different things. And most of my contracts, I would say 80% of them were with the World Bank. So it's a lot easier once you're in a system to transition. But it also depends what you're doing on some of the projects. And a lot of the projects I kind of acted not just as an expert on skills or TVAT, but also as a bit of a project manager. And so gaining those skills and experiences kind of demonstrated that I was able to kind of work in the more project management type role, or look at, you know, the entire work that the World Bank does, as opposed to just being a subject matter expert in one area. I think it's such a personal decision to make. I wouldn't recommend anyone doing it without a lot of thought. And there are a lot of pros and cons about it as well. So you really have to decide if it's a good fit for you, and what stage of your career you want to do it in. So I mean, there's no blanket answer to this, because you can have terrible experiences as well, or you can have, you know, your full years booked with contracts. You can have really great experiences as well. So it's just a really tricky question to answer.
Thanks, Myra. Sebastian, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, just on that point of stability, which I thought was really interesting, because I had actually a different experience. So yeah, I ended up becoming a consultant after 5 or 6 years experience in the sector. I'd completed a 1-year project that couldn't be renewed. So yeah, I thought I would just apply for jobs and find one, but actually I was offered some consultancy projects while I was looking for jobs, and I ended up finding I had more stability as a consultant than I'd had as an employee. I mean, I live in the UK, so I get free healthcare over here, but and that's something to consider where you're based. But you know, I mentioned in my career I started at ODI and Save the Children, and I spent 3 years at ODI and 2 years at Save the Children. You know, what I didn't say is I had, I think, 13 contracts at those 2 organizations. So they were constantly expiring, and there's that sort of constant anxiety. And you do find that a lot in this sector of very few sort of long-term permanent roles, and a lot of contracts, you know, about to expire, which is it's not good for mental health. So yeah, I actually found as a consultant I had more stability, and yeah, maybe I was quite fortunate with the kind of projects I was getting based on the sort of thematic work and network I had. And yeah, I think if I wasn't working for IAP now, I would probably just go back to being a consultant. Yeah. I think, yeah, that point of working on the meter projects is quite significant, actually. When you're a consultant, if you have meetings with people, it's because they're discussing directly the inputs you're doing, the work you're doing. When you're in an organization, your inbox is a little bit insane. You get pulled into a lot of meetings that are, yes, you should be there, but you know, how important are they? That kind of thing. So yeah, definitely something to weigh up.
All right, thanks you both. I've got 2 final questions because I know we're running out of time here. One is, there's a lot of talk about network, and everybody kind of that talked today talked about how important the network is. I know there was some advice that was given in the chat box, but any other advice on how do you network? How were you successful networking? How do people create a network? Anybody want to jump in on the networking piece, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I'll add one thing. So yeah, when I've been at organizations, I've often sort of volunteered or worked on projects that work with lots of different organizations. So for example, when I was at Save the Children, I offered to work with the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, which is a network of, or a coalition of organizations. So immediately you're working with a whole bunch of people at different organizations. And same when I was at the GEM report, I offered to work on the Interagency Network for Education Emergencies working groups, which is a 3-year cycle of people from different organizations who come together to work on things. So it's not, I mean, there is that element of going to events, meeting people, introducing yourself, asking questions and making yourself visible. But I think once you're in organizations through a profession, like trying to find those projects that work with other people, I think that's probably, looking back, that's probably been the more effective way. But yeah, definitely do go to events, do ask questions, do make yourself visible at conferences. You know, I proactively sought out Will and spoke to Will at a conference before I joined the GEM report, because I was interested in the work he was doing, and yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that conferences are really important as a way of meeting people, particularly those conferences that have quite a practical orientation. I mean, we have the UK Evaluation Society conference, where most is actually the consultancy firms delivering the projects who do a lot of the sessions. But I also started out going to Upfeed, you know, in Oxford, and you know, just meeting people. I think being genuinely really interested in a particular area or something like that, that really helps, because then you can come out with not the questions that are just somebody putting I have a comment on a question, but you know, something where you're genuinely interested and you know something about it. But I would also say that I think for most of us, networking is just how we are, really, isn't it? You know, sort of it's part of the soft skills, you know, that we're being, you know, talked about. I think it is an essential part of the job. You have to enjoy sharing ideas and talking with people and so on, and the more opportunity you can give yourself to do it. And also, I think, as Seb said, you know, sort of volunteering for things that will mean that you meet and work with other people. And I think it's that working with people, I think, that gives you that shared experience that lasts you for the rest of your career.
Excellent, thanks. I want to just come down on the networking piece. It's an important part of this field. You know, that's part of how we ended up with our panelist here, was just me trying to continue to enrich and expand the network. A few people have mentioned the importance of reaching out to individuals. And I know students, you're hesitant to reach out to individuals. I thought, can I give some really nice advice before she left about making sure it's not just a generic reach out? You know, do some research before you reach out to individuals about what are they doing and how can your interests connect with what they're working on, instead of just getting generic emails. So don't hesitate to reach out, but make sure that it's purposeful. All right, the final question. We had a couple of different questions on skills, and I want to broaden that a little bit to, you know, basically any final advice. So thinking about the skills piece, you know, what might important skills that students should be working on either in their current program or alternatively outside the program, and what additional advice would you have from somebody completing a master's or PhD program or looking to change field? So this is your opportunity to give your final bit of input here. So who wants to jump and get us started here? So Myra, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to talk about skills because there's so many skills that are so important and valuable. I will definitely say, just because of the field, you definitely need strong research skills, regardless of if you're in a research role or not, because just being able to interpret and understand research is super important to be able to, you know, justify projects and work on that. So if you don't have research experience at all and you're in a master's program, I think if you're in a PhD program, you probably have some. I would say definitely take either intro courses or intermediary courses as well. In an organization like the World Bank, it's also very easy to, you know, if you're in an operations role, you can definitely also write a research paper or working paper on the side or briefs or whatever. So definitely research roles. I think someone mentioned Excel. I mean, I didn't really understand the importance of Excel for every single thing that we use and we do. So I would say hard data skills as well, if you're interested in that. A lot of our needs are, you know, Stata and R and those sorts of things. In terms of sort of educational technical skills, it's kind of hard at a master's degree level. At a PhD, it's obviously different because you've chosen a focus, but at a master's degree level, it's a little bit tough because, you know, it depends on if you've worked in education before, if you've not worked in education. But having a good, solid understanding of the major concepts and the major sort of topics that people cover when it comes to international development, and kind of understanding the technical expertise that's going to be required for some of these roles. So whether, you know, you want to work with teachers, or you want to work in skills development, or you want to work in assessments, I just keep mentioning these because they're on the top of my head, or girls education, or, you know, education in FCB context, getting as much information on that as possible if you don't have it already is super key. I mean, there's so many like personality skills that are also required for this work. You know, you have to be very communicative, very open, very honest, work across a lot of different cultures. Everything is very likely always delayed, so you need a lot of patience working with a lot of bureaucracies. I might just be talking about the World Bank, but those sorts of skills, those kind of more soft skills are super important in our work as well.
Thanks, Myra. Sebastian.
Agree with everything Myra said, super useful. One thing I forgot to suggest to sort of help bridge that gap between studying and working is using the papers you write at university, whether it's dissertation or smaller papers. You can reach out to organizations and say, look, I'm going to be writing a paper. Is there a question you want answered? Or, do you have a data set that you maybe don't have time or capacity to deal with? Could we work on a mini research project together? So that's kind of like a mini internship type of thing where you're building a connection with an organization and you're developing the skills you want, in a paper that you're going to be writing anyway. Think about what skills you could develop through the papers you write. Your lecturers should be able to help connect you with organizations that, might want things answered. And it gives you, that first piece of research or writing to talk about in interviews as well. So that could be an opportunity.
Thanks, Sebastian. Alison, go ahead.
This is fairly basic, and I think anybody doing the level of sort of study that we're talking about here probably has it. But I think the ability to assess data critically, to know what's credible and what's not in terms of evidence, is really important, and actually is remarkably not present in many people. So if I think facility with sort of, I don't know, to look at statistics and be able to interpret them and to be able to say what's going on the basis of, the stats, and whether they're good or whether they tell you anything. That level of ability to use data, I think, is important. You can probably, I think things are changing now, but certainly, otherwise we could, sort of, you didn't need that much more. But being able to review something and to say whether it's credible or not, I think is incredibly useful. Yeah. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Alison. Hyowon, any final advice from you on skills needed or other advice that you would encourage our students trying to break into the field?
I basically agree with everyone else just have said. I just feel like I was not the perfect example to give a speech in this panel, but still, I wish all the best for everyone else. Yes, it's almost midnight here. Thank you. Have a great day.
Well, I think that one of the things you want is that there isn't actually a perfect example in this field, right? That this field is messy and you have lots of different routes to careers in this field. And that's why a panel like this is really important. So people can see the variety of ways that you get in and navigate yourself. But there are some obviously key things. We've been talking about skills and networking, trying to gain experience, but still it's quite a roundabout way. And if we asked 50 different people working in this, they would give 50 different career paths. So, all right, I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to give a special thank you to our panelists for joining and sharing things today. Thanks to the event planning team, including Jiangbei, who's been asking questions, but those behind the scenes as well that are working with us at Moray House at the University of Edinburgh, so Evelyn, Rona, and Jia. I'd encourage you to continue to connect with us at the CEID community. That's our Twitter handle. You can look at our research group. We also have a new master's program coming out. I know most of you are already in school, but if you're looking to move into this field, you heard a couple people deciding to move in and then going back for an education, and we've got a new master's in comparative ed and international development here. Final thing is that this is just the first of 2 panels. So panel 2 will be happening next Friday. We have individuals from UNGI, from the, where else do we have people from? From IBE Unesco, from ITA Pakistan, from 6 different organizations. You'll get to hear more different career paths and advice. If you haven't already registered, please do so. You can register on our Eventbrite page for the CEID community. So I think that's it for us today. Thanks again for our panelists. Thanks for all the advice orally and in the chat box. I hope everybody was following the chat box because a lot of great things going on there, including some good networking. So I think that is it for me. Thanks, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.